Yes, so welcome to our after lunch session on energy for the people looking beyond development as usual. As has been mentioned already in previous sessions, in the working paper that we just discussed, the Just Transition discussion has thus far largely focused on the concerns of unions in the global north, and particularly in its formal sector workers, and who now got so excited that he really wants or she to read the whole piece. It's over there at the table. Make sure you get your copy. There are also other TUED working papers present. Take all of them. They are all good. They are all free. So in this session, we want to expand the view a little bit and look at the perspective of workers from the South, as well as having a critical view on what development as usual means. Development as usual meaning being growth-focused, extractive, raising GDP, promoting consumptions, and in some case also limiting the distribution of wealth, as we all know. So on this panel, we will hear from comrades from Puerto Rico and the US talking about the South within the North, which we already have been tackling, from Vietnam, South Korea, and Brazil, and they will contextualize these questions within their regions and also talk about alternative approaches. So first, I'd like to welcome Ángel Jaramillo from the Unión de Trabajadores de la Industria Eléctrica y Riego. Welcome. And Judy Gonzalez from the New York State Nurses Association. So, as you know, Neisner has been at the forefront of disaster recovery work since the days after Hurricane Sandy, going door to door in affected areas, but also expressing the need to build back better. And UTIER has been consistent in denouncing the privatization plans of various government administrations and also the recent intentional slowness in the process of restoring the electrical system. The union has warned for decades how various administrations have undermined workers and intentionally damaged the infrastructure of the Puerto Rico Electric Power Authority, claiming that electricity is a human right and not a commodity. So, Ángel, please, the floor is yours.
Buenas tardes a los compañeros y compañeras. Voy a hablar en mi idioma español. Tengo aquí a mi amigo y compañero, el traductor, José Andrés Venero, Narváez Venero. Él va a estar traduciendo.
Good afternoon, fellow brothers and sisters. Thank you for the invitation. I am Jose Narváez. I will be the translator for this session.
Es palpable el desasosiego que se siente en la calle, en nuestras comunidades y en nuestros hogares ante la incertidumbre que crea la realidad que se vive en Puerto Rico. Y no es para menos. Estamos enfrentando dos eventos a la vez que no se apreciaban en Puerto Rico desde el principio del siglo XX. Por un lado, una Junta de Control Fiscal que se asemeja mucho al Consejo Ejecutivo impuesto por la Ley Federal en 1900, donde los puertorriqueños no teníamos derecho al voto. Y por otro lado, el azote del huracán, el azote de un huracán que solo se encuentra comparable en el huracán San Felipe en 1928. Fueron eventos traumáticos en nuestra sociedad del siglo pasado y resultan hasta más traumáticos en el siglo XXI. Hoy en día encaramos dicho trastorno en un ambiente altamente vulnerable, producto de cúmulo de malas decisiones, del consumismo, de la politización y de la corrupción de nuestras estructuras públicas y privadas.
The restlessness that is felt in the streets, in our communities, and in our homes before the uncertainty that has been created by the reality of those who live in Puerto Rico has become tangible, and with a good reason. We are simultaneously facing two events that had not been overcome within the island since the beginning of the 20th century. On the other hand, there is an oversight fiscal board which quite resembles the executive board that was enforced by the Foraker law of 1900s, which Puerto Ricans had no vote. However, there is the strike of another hurricane, which could only be compared to Hurricane San Felipe back in 1920. These were traumatic events for our society during the past century and will be more traumatic within the 21st century. Today, we face such disturbance in a highly vulnerable environment, which has been the product of various poor decisions, consumerism, corruption within our public and private structures.
Posiblemente donde se ha hecho más evidente esta expresión de vulnerabilidad ha sido en nuestro sistema eléctrico. El huracán María puso a relieve el costo que ha tenido el permitir que la agenda política y el inversionismo sean los que guíen las decisiones sobre nuestro sistema energético. Miles de millones de dólares invertidos en propuestas de gasoductos, en plantas de carbón y de gas natural y una adición al petróleo ha impedido la adopción de una transición ordenada y consona con nuestra realidad en la isla caribeña.
It is possible that the expressions of vulnerability has been more evident in our electric grid. Hurricane Maria revealed the cost of allowing political agenda investment and becoming the guidelines which decisions have been concerning in our energy grid. Billions of invested dollars on proposals of gasoduct, coal, and natural gas plants and an addiction to oil have prevented the implementation of a consonant and orderly transition fitting to the reality of a Caribbean island.
La debilidad de la infraestructura eléctrica y los retos que se han enfrentado para energizar el país luego del huracán han acelerado la acción por parte del gobierno y la Junta de Control Fiscal para transformar por vía la privatización el sistema eléctrico. Y enfatizo que la han acelerado porque la privatización ha sido la agenda que han estado trabajando los sectores de interés por décadas, encontrando oídos receptores en diversas administraciones de gobierno.
The weakness of the energy grid and the challenges that have been faced to energize the country after hurricane has accelerated the action taken by the government and the Oversight Fiscal Board to transform the road to privatization of the energy grid. And I emphasize that it has accelerated it because privatization has been the agenda which sectors of interest have worked for decades, seeking receptive listeners in various government administrations.
Pero a la vez ha acelerado y acrecentado el interés de la ciudadanía en explorar alternativas y soluciones energéticas asequibles, confiables y cónsonas con un ambiente sano y seguro, al margen de lo que trabaja el gobierno. Si me preguntan, yo veo un país moviéndose para sacarle la alfombra debajo de los pies a la propuesta de privatización. Después de todo, en un monopolio, lo que atrae el interés privado no son los activos, sino los consumidores que garantizan el repago.
They have also accelerated and increased the interest of general public towards exploring affordable energy solutions that are reliable and consistent, which promote a healthier and a safer environment, regardless of what is the government working on. If you ask me, I can see a country that is moving forward to pull the rug from under the feet of privatization proposals. After all, in a monopoly, what captures the private sector's interest are not the assets, but what consumers can ensure with repayment.
Por esto, las presentaciones y discusiones que vamos a tener y hemos tenido hoy adquieren tanta relevancia, porque el pueblo y los trabajadores y trabajadoras retienen un gran poder en toda esta discusión sobre la transformación del sistema eléctrico y es importante que así lo reconozcamos. Desafortunadamente, a pesar de tratarse de un tema medular que impacta a toda la población y en generaciones futuras, el gobierno no ha ofrecido verdaderos espacios de discusión y participación pública sobre el tema. La legislatura es la única que ha abierto un poco el espacio a través de las vistas públicas que, aunque importantes, resultan insuficientes en el descargue de la responsabilidad pública que implica el futuro energético.
That is why the presentations and discussion we have today are so relevant, because the people and the workers both retain great power in all of this discussion concerning the transformation of the energy grid, and it is important to recognize them. Unfortunately, in spite of having this essential matter that impacts an entire population and future generation, the government has not offered real forums or of discussions, nor the public participation of this topic. The legislature is the only one that has opened a small space through public hearings, which, although important, are insufficient in the discharge of public responsibility that implies to the future of energy.
Por su parte, el gobierno y la Junta de Control Fiscal presenta la privatización por vía de concesiones y venta de activos como la única ruta posible para transformar la corporación pública y el sector energético del país.
While the government of Puerto Rico and the Oversight Fiscal Board present privatization through concessions and the sale of assets as the only possible alternative to transform the public utility and the energy sector of the country.
Pero como mencionaba el doctor Cecilio Ortiz de la Universidad de Puerto Rico, recinto de Mayagüez, la pasada semana en el centro de discusión del país sobre la transformación de nuestro sistema eléctrico debería girar en torno a cómo logramos seguridad energética. Y aquí reflexiono sobre la seguridad energética en su aspecto más amplio, que permita utilizar recursos disponibles localmente, sol, viento, hidro, como tecnología limpia, que asegure un costo accesible y razonable para todos, que se apoye un sector laboral local diestro, que pueda resistir y recuperar con mayor facilidad ante eventos atmosféricos, que promueva la participación activa de todos y todas, que promueva la equidad y que permita el desarrollo de economías locales. Sin embargo, estas consideraciones quedan excluidas de la discusión y la toma de decisión actuales.
But as Dr. Cecilio Ortiz, professor of the University of Puerto Rico in the campus of Mayagüez, mentioned last week, that focus of the country's discussions concerning the transformation of our smart grid should revolve around in how we achieve the energy security. And here I reflect on the broadest aspect of energy security, which allows to use locally available resources such as sun, wind, hydro, with a clean technology to ensure an accessible and reasonable cost for all, that relies on a local skilled labor sector that can resist and recover easily from atmospheric events, which can promote the active participation of all, which would also promote equity that allows the development of local economies. However, these considerations are excluded from discussions and current decision-making processes.
Y esto añade un dato importante y un estudio publicado en el 2017 por el Transnational Institute que apunta a una tendencia mundial de regresar a manos públicas el servicio que en su momento se había privatizado. Y citas completo la nota.
To this, I add an important fact, and this is a study in 2017 by the Transnational Institute, which points to a global trend of returning to services empowered by public workforce, which at a time they have been privatized. The study states, for decades, it has been said to us that outsourcing, privatization, public-private partnerships, and funding systems are the only options available to local authorities in a characterized context of more duties and fewer resources. However, there is more evidence that these type of policies, they in long term have negative impacts for their public budgets, and they finish leading deficient services to a loss of democratic responsibility. And it is becoming more evident that by abandoning the outsourcing, partnerships, and other similar neoliberal policies, and instead of deciding for the internal provision of public services, it generates significant savings. The TNI report highlights 835 cases of deprivatizations. The privatized service is reverted to the public sector in 45 countries in recent years. 311 of these are within the energy sector. Such list is not comprehensive and only lists some examples. However, the study highlights that the trend is clear and that it has gone almost unnoticed because of how the media and the political approach have concealed the failure of privatization and austerity policies and the alternative models of public services that allows us to face challenges with quality. The study emphasizes that deprivatization is particularly evident in the energy sector as a necessary measure to be able to empower the transition towards efficient, affordable energy systems based on renewable energies.
Por eso debemos como ciudadanos preguntarnos, ¿es la privatización la única ruta? ¿Es la mejor ruta para asegurar el bienestar, la equidad, justicia ambiental para todos y todas y mayor competitividad y desarrollo como país? ¿Es posible una transformación desde una base pública? Son preguntas que debemos procurar hacernos y que buscaremos atender en el día de hoy.
Why must citizens ask, is privatization the only alternative? Is that a better alternative that will ensure my well-being, equity, and environmental justice for all, and a greater development as a country? Is a transformation from a public base possible? These are matters that we should inquire ourselves and seek to attend today.
A la vez debemos procurar mayor conocimiento sobre la posibilidad que tenemos de iniciar nuestras propias transformaciones energéticas y no quedar simplemente a expensas de las decisiones del gobierno. Esto nos permitirá no solo enfrentar con mayor capacidad futuros atmosféricos, sino que permiten ocupar un espacio de participación activa sobre las decisiones energéticas. Por eso, las experiencias de iniciativas comunitarias de energías renovables que muestran caminos alternos que permiten transformaciones locales, transformaciones que redundan en beneficios sociales más allá de la energía, y debe ser el camino a seguir. De igual manera que queremos proveer la información sobre alternativas solares disponibles para los ciudadanos, aclarando mitos sobre la energía solar y ofreciendo algunas guías prácticas de paso y consideraciones para iniciar como energía solar en su residencia o comunidad.
At the same time, we must try to acquire further knowledge regards to the possibility that we have to start our own energy transformations and not to be simply left at expense of the government's decisions. This will not only allow us to face future atmospheric events with a greater capacity, but it would also allow us to occupy a space in active participation concerning energy decisions. But those experiences of communitary initiatives of renewable energies demonstrated the alternate pathways that allow local transformations that result in social benefits that go beyond the path we should follow.
Finalmente, antes de finalizar, todos los que hemos estado aquí hemos narrado un problema en común que afecta a todos nuestros países. La pregunta que tenemos que nosotros comenzar a contestar es qué plan vamos a establecer para ejecutar y poder revertir lo que todos nuestros países están experimentando. Esto no está ahí.
We should all try to plan ahead and make a strategic plan. That way we can take a step forward of what our countries are taking in decision.
Por eso agradecemos la invitación que CUNY nos hizo, pero lo importante de estos eventos es comenzar a trabajar en un plan. Escucharnos solamente no va a cambiar nuestras realidades. Y ese plan tenemos que comenzar a trabajarlo todos, porque si no, nos vamos a quedar sin nada.
I really appreciate CUNY's opportunity for inviting me here, and we all need to work in a plan. We need to speak of such a plan, and we need to start talking about that, because if we do not, we will end up with nothing.
Muchas gracias.
Hello. Again, on behalf of the nurses in New York State Nurses Association, I want to thank you for inviting us to participate. After the Hurricane Sandy, our union, we had just captured the leadership of our union, and we're in the process of transforming it into more of a social justice union. I think that was 5 years ago. Was it 6 years ago? 5, anyway, whatever. We began doing disaster relief, and the question of climate started to materialize in our own minds, that we had a big problem with climate. That was our first wake-up call to what was going on. So we engaged in our union in a process of education, linking the issues of climate with the tragedy we faced immediately after Hurricane Sandy, with the fact that the government and these corporations that pretty much controlled our lives were not interested in the recovery that was needed, and where people, union members and communities actually intervened to make things better. That it was really up to us to fix that. Although it was a contradiction, because while we really appreciated the fact that there were so many volunteers assisting communities to recover, we felt that that was wrong, that that's something that the government should take responsibility for. But the other side of that was that we knew that as a community we could actually help ourselves, that we could do that. So what happened after the hurricanes hit the Caribbean, having had some experience in disaster work, many of us felt compelled, well, we really have to do something about this. So we kind of formed a recovery network. I went to Puerto Rico 6 times after the hurricane. We sent 3 teams of about 8 brigades each over there. We went to Virgin Islands, we've been to Chiapas and many other places since. And as bad as Sandy was, Maria destroyed 80% of the island completely. You had a green island that turned brown. And while many of us had families and friends and people that we were close to and couldn't even reach them for a while, when we got there, it was just much more devastating than what we thought it could possibly be. We set up clinics to help people. And I think it's really important to think, when you think about Puerto Rico, I mean, the plans that Jaramillo talked about before to privatize, they were in place. They were just waiting. I mean, it's like disaster capitalism on steroids when you think of Puerto Rico. The vultures moved in immediately. You had already had the Promesa Act and austerity imposed on the island, which because it's a direct colony of the United States, there's no autonomy to determine your destiny. You have the Jones Act, which prevents Puerto Rico from being able to import goods and services from neighboring countries. Everything has to go to Jacksonville, Florida, get unloaded on boats, get reloaded on boats, come back to the island. So you face higher prices, spoiled food, long waits for materials. Although they did suspend the Jones Act for about 10 days after the hurricane because the tragedy was so incredible. Santo Domingo is right across the Straits of Mona. They can't even send stuff across those straits to the island. You have the Promesa Act, and you have other laws that require the country, when you generate income, it all has to go back to pay hedge funds and banks, because they don't have the opportunity to spend the money on services. So you have already had a deterioration of services, and you had a deterioration of the infrastructure. With all the layoffs in the electrical industry, you had less maintenance of the electrical grid. You had poor access to supplies. Things couldn't be maintained. You already had blackouts daily in many areas of the community. So even before Irma hit, the first hurricane, a lot of people were suffering blackout just in advance. Once you had Maria, the entire country went dark. People still don't have power. I think it's 10%, ¿verdad? 10% of people. This is 8 months later, almost 9 months later, people still don't have electricity. Immediately after, using generators with diesel fuel, created more poisons in the environment. And it's not that in Puerto Rico people have not protested and fought against fossil fuel use and the destruction of the environment. There was a big struggle against the gasoducto, which was a pipeline from north to south. And to the credit of UTIER, the Electrical Workers Union, who could have gotten jobs, they also opposed that. There's a link between the climate movement and the unions. And the same thing is true with the coal ash deposits in Peñuelas, the cenizas, that another byproduct of fossil fuels, which would have also poisoned the environment and made the situation worse. Just before the hurricane, there were huge protests there. And unfortunately, the effect of the coal ash was that if there is a big storm, that just gets proliferated in the water supply and in the soil and in the air, and that is what happened, which is why you had so much toxic water over there. So the fight against privatization of the PREPA, of the electoral system, was premeditated. It was the desire to privatize it was premeditated. You had a destruction of infrastructure. You had poor maintenance. Many of us believe, a purposeful wait, a delay in returning energy by having stores. We saw areas in which there were materials that were not accessible to repair the grid. So what happens? People who may believe that they should have public ownership of energy or like that idea, they'll take anything if somebody says, I'm going to restore your power. So the support for privatization, great. Just like charter schools. You defund public schools, you make them impossible to provide the services, and you say, well, I'm going to come in with charter schools, and that's going to be better for you. Because people are very immediate. Their needs are very immediate, and they respond immediately. And so the struggle in Puerto Rico against privatization of the electrical system is very linked to the struggle against privatization of the public schools, against privatization of the public health system, which has deteriorated dramatically as well, as it has in this country. And I think it's very important to think about, I think it's been said before, it's abstract. Climate is abstract. Public ownership is an abstraction. What changes that is when people fight back and understand that their own interests are linked to public ownership. What does that mean? We look at the model in Europe and how that's failed miserably. We look at charter schools. They don't do better than public schools. So building these movements are critical. It's not winning the favor of legislators or negotiating that gets you change. And I'll just use a micro example, a tiny micro example. Years ago, maybe 35 years ago in this country, health workers, including majority nurses, were getting stuck with needles and getting AIDS, getting hepatitis B, non-A, non-B hepatitis, which is now known as hepatitis C, because these needles were dangerous. We were getting stuck. We were dying. People were dying. And the companies that made these needles also had the technology and the capability of immediately getting rid of all those needles and putting needleless systems in place. But they didn't want to cannibalize their own market. They were still making profit off of these dangerous items. It wasn't negotiating with the companies or passing laws that changed it. It was mass energy, mass movement of people, putting their bodies on the line, saying, you're not going to kill us anymore. You're going to have to develop this technology. You're going to have to use this technology, and this technology has to be implemented. It was those mass movements that put OSHA and put the CDC and made these companies destroy their products and develop the new products. I think it's a very micro example, but these, fossil fuels are killing us. They're killing our planet. And it's through our movements and through our mobilization of people that that's going to change. And I think that in Puerto Rico, what we found is right after the hurricane, when FEMA was not there, when the government wasn't there, and corporations were that nobody was helping people, it was the people themselves that were helping themselves. It was the trade unions in the United States who sent volunteers over. The solidarity movement was incredible. People said, oh, maybe we can survive without depending on the United States immediately after, because that's all there was, just like in Hurricane Sandy. But months later, that sentiment has dropped because A, 300,000 people have left the island, although some are returning, and B, people forget. You get the selective amnesia once the crisis is over. So it's really capturing that moment that's critical. But we have to look to Puerto Rico as a sample of what's happening with these vulture capitalists and these hedge funds. They want to turn it into a billionaire's playground. And we're seeing that in all ways. There's a law that you can't privatize the beaches. There's an elderly population that's remaining. There's a brain drain going on. The destruction of the country is very much linked to the destruction of the electrical grid and the privatization attempts it is given as the only solution. We have to privatize because the system isn't working. It's not that it was defunded. It's not that it's placed in a context. And when people are desperate, they're going to go for it. So I think what's critical is to talk about the power that we do have, to make people remember that for the first months after the hurricane, it was the people that allowed people to survive. It was the people's ingenuity. We had an area in which there was in Utuado, in the mountains of Utuado, there was a bridge that fell, and there were 135 people who couldn't get off this area on the other side of the bridge. There was no other way to get out. So what happened was people went and got a shopping cart and took the wheels off and created a pulley and a rope from one end of that land to the mainland so they could get groceries and things for people and cross over with the shopping cart. That bridge is still not constructed. People are still using that shopping cart. When the river is not high, because we crossed the river one day and then it became high, we couldn't cross it to deliver health care. People are climbing down a ladder and going across. No bridge 8 months later. It's unbelievable. So when people have faith in themselves and people have hope and know what the future can bring, they can demand that these things happen. We have to continue to instill hope in people and let them know that these victories are possible, instead of having complacency and dependency and waiting to see who's going to save us. We can save ourselves, and that's what we have to emphasize. We can save ourselves. We do have that power. We just have to recognize it and encourage that hope in others. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Angel and Judy, for this update. As devastating as it is, it's good to be reminded. So we are now taking a turn to another region, to Asia. And first, I'd like to welcome Sharon from Union Aid Abroad-APHEDA, Vietnam. So Vietnam is a country in transition, on the one hand side with respect to economic development after the devastation of over 100 years of colonialism and war, but also obviously with respect to the trade union situation, which is in a transitional stage as well. So Sharon, I think you're going to tell us more about that.
All right, thank you. I thought I share something, and after listening this morning, I have to change my, what I was going to say, because the message I get from this morning's presentation, that connectedness, how this energy issue is connected among the workers and the others, general population, but at the same time, natural resources and the political situation, but at the same time, it is not linked to just one, political boundary. It has linked with, across the boundaries. So what I'm going to do, within 10 minutes is that talk about a region connected with Vietnam, and that region is called Mekong Region, and it's connected with this river called Mekong. Those of you who have traveled to that part of the world, it's a very important, the river which starts from China and ends in Vietnam. And it flows through 6 different countries, including Thailand. And it has excluding Vietnam, China and Thailand, it has about 171 million, the population that 4 countries has, and about 92 working population. But the trade union numbers are not so great. It's about 10.8 million. It's about 11% organized. And if you remove the Vietnam, which has 10 million organized workforce, then the rest of the organized workforce is really, really very small. So what I will do is I will quickly go through some of the, the political, economic, and demographic sort of situation, and then draw a few environmental or some issues connected to energy and other broader development issues, and also try to talk about asbestos. One of the, this fiber, natural fiber, which Daniel mentioned this morning, 76 countries have already banned, but not in that region, and which has sort of similarities with the energy democracy we are talking about, transition issues. So just to, talk about some of the, political situation of these 4 countries. Vietnam and Laos has a political situation, what you can call one-party system, and it's a communist government. So it's a Communist Party of Vietnam, Communist Party of Laos. And then Cambodia, it has a multi-party system, but I'm not sure how much it is, in the newspaper here, this part of the world. There is a, the party, continuing after 1993 election, and it is becoming like more and more autocratic, the government led by Prime Minister Hun Sen. And last year, they banned the opposition party and distributed those seats to themselves. So that's the, the political situation of Cambodia. And then Myanmar, we know the Myanmar had election after, the army junta government, 2015 had election. NLD, National League of Democracy, led by Aung San Suu Kyi, won the, the election. But structurally, the military constitution made in such a way that never the NLD going to have a majority government, even if it has a 75%, but it cannot change the constitution. And according to constitution, 25, the person seats are always with the military. And to change it, they have to have a 76%, and military never going to give that. So there is that deadlock. Economically, the development paradigm, that part of the world is industrialization through foreign direct investment. And always development is talked in the narrative of GDP growth. Like 6.5% Vietnam has consistently for last 10 years. And then, the Myanmar is picking up 7.5%, and then Cambodia and Laos in between. But at the same time, there are big free trade agreements being signed, and Vietnam is part of it. You may have heard this TPP, of Trans-Pacific Partnership, which died after the current US government came in power. But then again, there is another CPTPP without US being discussed, which is Comprehensive Partnership, Trans-Pacific Partnership. That is the political situation. Now, when we talk about what is the character of this new development paradigm in that part of the region, in a practical terms, what it means is land grabbing and deforestation. And land grabbing, deforestation for mining, or big plantations like rubber plantation or banana plantation or pineapple plantation. And these are subsidized or without any subsidy to local indigenous people. And they were promised to have the labor opportunity, but in the end they wouldn't have any. So they become landless and workless laborers. And what it also means is very high input chemical-led plantation, or the single crop system, which is very vulnerable to different type of the pest and other infestation. And mostly these are foreign direct investment, big corporation companies and private industries led development, and then lots of, as I mentioned earlier, free trade agreement. So what it is doing now then is that, as we hear this morning, the environmental impacts, for example, extreme weather conditions are also exist in that part of the world, big droughts or the high intensive rainfalls, and because the topography is hilly and therefore landslides, erosion, flooding are quite big issues. Similarly, if we look at Vietnam and Cambodia, the coastlines are very long, and with the changes in the climate, changes in sea temperature, what is happening is that the water temperature is changing, and the fish and other aquatic species available now, their behavior has changed. And what the farmers in the coastal area say is that now the fish are no longer available in the coastal area. And what that means for a small farmer is that they have to go to deeper sea, but they don't have bigger boats to go in the deep end. So it will be good, the bigger farmers or the companies who have big, this fishing boat, they can go deep into and still do the business. But the small farmers, they are pushed out, or they look for other alternative. So the phenomena, that what that does is that migration. So migration is a big issue because of the climate, the impact of the natural, as well as because of this economic, the land grabbing, deforestation. It is not the migration of, like a external migration, like, the Myanmar people or Vietnamese moving out of the country, but within the country also there are big migration, the big movement of workers, big movement of people, which are not sort of, often discussed, but there are big challenges. People coming from rural areas to urban areas, now they have to live in an urban setting, which is completely different in terms of the resources and the way they live. So that is, another issue for workers and the people. The other issue in environment to talk about is in the Mekong. As I mentioned, Mekong River is quite important, but because in Mekong there are a lot of dams being planned and being built. 6 dams already constructed. 4 of those are in China. Nobody knows what's happening there. But then downstream there are 2 dams being constructed, and the major problem of that, the dams, are that it not only it has impact on the working lives and so on, but also the flow of water, volume of water flows downstream, and the silt flow downstream. So because of dam, the fish cannot migrate and have a proper breeding. But at the same time, with the blockage of silt, the soil, Mekong Delta gets a very poor water quality, and as a result, now the rice population is going down. The production is down now. And for your information, Vietnam is the largest rice producer, and with the going down of this rice production, it will have a food security impact globally. I have got 3 more minutes just to add few more points on these issues. We heard of militarization and other issue, but at the same time, another issue to mention is the violent gangs. It's another phenomenon. Security groups and gangs being employed by companies to block or stop union coming to the workplaces. So the access to workplace is a big issue. The another issue quickly mentioned is the women, the challenges for women, particularly equal pay is a big issue. For the same work, same period of time, there is a less pay for women workers, which is the major problem for trade unions to look into. Then occupational health and safety issues, increasing the occupational safety issues like toxic waste, dust, and including asbestos. The asbestos is a major issue, as I mentioned earlier. It has these countries, they have been, the policy is safe use of asbestos, and the challenge is that now how do we, it involves knowledge, awareness, it involves what is the alternative to asbestos, it involves corruption, companies, sort of using money to bribe government and policymakers so that they can continue to use asbestos. And so there are multiple dynamics, but I will just say that finally, what I would like to say is that in 2010, Vietnam has a policy to safe use, but now, this year, they announced that by 2023, they will ban asbestos. Through continuous working with trade union, plus other networks in the country, including NGOs and other civil society groups, so it can work. I will just stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon. And now we are going over to South Korea, and we'll hear from Baek from KPTU's Gas Corporation branch. KPTU, among others, have been written a report on the necessity of public planning and reorganizing for energy transition. And there they state that the Korean government energy policy has changed drastically. On the one hand side, actual plans for expansion of the renewable energy have been tried, but on the other hand, the current energy policy seems to be an attempt to build what they call a new house in the old frame. So please.
You can see this map. This map is Northeast Asia. There are 4 countries. One is China, the other one is Japan, and two Korea, North Korea, South Korea. I come from Seoul, South Korea. I belong to Caucasus Union Branch. Caucasus stands for Korea Gas Corporation. Caucasus is run by Korea government. Caucasus import LNG from Middle East, Southeast Asia, and Australia and USA, and supply to regional city gas company or other power station, power generate company. And Caucasus Union Branch is belong to KPTU. KPTU stands for Korean Public Service and Transport Workers Union. My presentation content, first I can say to you candlelight revelation, and second, Moon Jae-in government's energy policy. Last, I will say to you Inter-Korea and US North Korea summit talk. This is a Korean political situation. Korea was divided by North Korea and South Korea since after World War II. And then 5 years later, there was a Korean War. It lasted 3 years. And there was incomplete democracy and 재벌. 재벌 means is Korean style big company. 재벌 operated Korean economic system, and then there was a worse economic and social crisis. Last year there was a big change. Democratic progressive government was established by Candle People's Revolution. This picture is a Korean president. This there is this 3 president was a dictator. These 2 guys president got power from military coup d'etat. But anyway, this President Park Chung-hee was President Park Chung-hee introduced nuclear power system. This president introduced natural gas in Korea, and political power continue conservative. However, political power turned to progressive party. However, and then political power turned to conservative party. This conservative party is very business-friendly company, business-friendly government. So these 2 presidents promote privatize for the public company. So and then this political power turned to a progressive government. 2 years ago, there was big event in Korea. this president was very big political bribe. So many Korean people come to together, come to Seoul city. So President Park-geun-hye was stepped down, and then new government was established. His name, new government president's name is Moon Jae-in. Moon Jae-in president's energy policy is, he said that he introduced renewable energy to Korea. Previous, we have very low renewable energy. However, renewable energy will increase 20% by 2080. 2030. Is very big transition in energy system. This is power generation capacity in South Korea in last year. As you can see, there was main power is nuclear and LNG coal power system. Renewable energy very low capacity. However, this renewable energy will very increase from 10% to 34%. But nuclear or coal power will decreased to 11% or 23%. LNG power system also decreased from 30% to 27%. Main Korean government's energy plans, there are main is stop nuclear power station and it will and sustainable energy future. Moon Jae-in government declare 6 nuclear reactor construction plan cancelled, and they government don't allow license renewal of old nuclear power plant, and government said that strengthen nuclear safety and committee of nuclear safety. And also, new government declare sustainable energy future. First, government don't construct new coal power plant, and new government reconsider to construct 9 coal power plant, and new government said that old coal power plant will be phased out. So, but natural gas power plant will increase compare other coal power system or nuclear power system. And renewable energy will increase 20% by 2030. This is a renewable energy system in South Korea. 1980, government make a rule, Renewable Energy Technology Promotion Act, and 1990, this law was revised to Act for Promoting Renewable Energy Development, Use and distribution. 2000s, government introduced FIT system, and this FIT system was revised to renewable portfolio system. Last year, new government declared renewable energy initiative. Nowadays in Korea, we have 5.5 solar capacity and 1 gigawatt wind power system. But this renewable energy system will increase 31 gigawatt solar system and 17 gigawatt wind capacity. This capacity will increase by 2030. But there is some problem in new government energy plan, because as you can, this figure is about electrical consumption change popular since 2003 until 2015. Energy consumption is continuously increased, but 2012 consumption is nearly slow down. This is yearly electricity demand forecast and performance of past electricity supply and demand system plan. This is this bold line is actual consumption result. This yellow, pink, the other dot line is electrical plan line. As you can see, this electricity consumption is slow down from 2012, but the government increase electrical power system. So there was an absence of a demand management policy and continuation of surplus demand and surplus forecast. The other one is nuclear phase-out roadmap, but nuclear power system is continued to 2030. And the other one is a private energy company into the coal-fired power generation. The other one is excess facility power generation backup system, because government said that renewable energy will increase, but government don't think about a backup system. So we need we need a backup system in case LNG power system. So NGO or KPTU propose for energy transition policy. First one is LNG generation should be designated or specified as a power as the base power source, because backup system for wind power or solar power. Second, LNG power generation designated as the base power should be designated as the public power generation company's power plants. And long-term rollover generation, which should function as a backup power source for renewable energy. Renewable energy expansion should be established in step-by-step and concrete manner by strengthening the policy of LNG import and wholesale. And fourth, limitation of power generation capacity of base power generation, such as nuclear power and coal power system, should also be gradually specified, and these nuclear and coal power should be decreased. Finally, it is necessary to strengthen the role of municipality related to energy and to cooperate with energy public company. This is pass. This picture is a satellite picture during night time. This part is North Korea. There is some problem, energy shortage. So South Korea suggests to North Korea renewable energy or natural gas power system can be solved in North Korea power shortage. And inter-Korea energy workers solidarity can to solve North Korea's energy problem. This is a Korea Peninsula. If nowadays North Korea, South Korea, we can each other dialogue. However, if they make a peace connecting, we can make a pipeline from Russia through North Korea to South Korea. This pipeline can to solve North Korea's electric shortage. This is summary too long. I will pass. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Now we are moving over to Brazil, to Diego Azzi, who is Professor of International Relations at the Federal University in Sao Paulo, but also something like a founding member of TUED. And he will look at the Brazilian situation, obviously. So there have been also obviously profound changes observed in Brazil since the coup against President Dilma Rousseff. And Diego wants to focus on the energy matrix and labor challenges and development.
Thank you. Thank you, Stefanie, for the introduction. Well, yes, actually, like many of our comrades, my presentation will bring more questions than answers. I've built it on some challenges that the idea of just transition faces in Brazil, and some differences from our reality to others, and the need to consider the different local contexts when discussing just transition or energy democracy. So prior to starting, I just want to say that I'm a former trade union advisor, having worked for ITUC Americas and CUT Brazil. And 2 years ago, I became a professor at the Federal University of ABC, which is the industrial towns around São Paulo in Brazil, and is also one of the 18 new public universities that were created during the Workers' Party governments. I think it's important to acknowledge that as well. So, my first question would be, should we talk about just transition or just transitions? And you might already imagine that I prefer to talk about just transitions, right? And I think that after the Paris Agreement, the discussion should enter the phase of implementing just transition plans, and that would lead the workers' movement to discuss the national realities of just transition or the difficulties of just transition more than trying to build a global plan for just transition. So when we take a look at the electricity sector, for instance, and we look at the OECD countries, we see a huge participation of coal in energy and electricity generation, right? So when we talk about OECD countries, just transition for coal workers is a priority, right? But if we look at Latin America and the Caribbean, the picture is totally different. And we see a very tiny percentage of coal participation in electricity generation, right? So we have a huge hydro capacity, and then oil plays a significant role as well. So taking a look at Brazil, right? Brazil is known for having one of the cleanest energy matrix in the world, especially due to its huge hydropower capacity, right? Which is true, and which has also made the Brazilian government very comfortable during the COP negotiations and able to push for a progressive agreement, right? So you can see that the blue is hydropower, the small green dots are wind power, red dots are thermal generation, and then the yellow circle here means our 2 nuclear power plants, right? So our matrix is hugely supplied by hydropower, but as you can see, hydro generation is sometimes very far away from the main urban centers in Brazil, which leads us to this very complex and big network, those black lines over there, as you can see, smaller, which are transmission lines infrastructure, right? That cut the country across many kilometers, right? Which also have an impact on local communities and local development. So all this is mainly public in Brazil still, which also made the country or trade unions in the country very comfortable while discussing public ownership of energy generation and transmission and etc. And that's why nowadays we are under a very strong attack on public assets linked to the energy sector, right? A huge wave of privatization is on the way, both on the electricity sector as well as the oil sector in Brazil. So we say that hydro generation is clean, renewable, so it's supposedly desirable, right? But as our comrade from Vietnam was saying just minutes ago, it also has huge impacts both on the environment and on the surrounding communities, right? So this is a picture of the Belo Monte Dam, which is the 3rd largest dam in the world. So it was being built. I'm not sure if you can see, but there are some tiny trucks over there, which are huge if you stand beside one of them. So this gives you an idea of the size of this infrastructure building, not to mention the flooded areas that will be flooded after it's functioning, right? But of course it generates a lot of jobs, right? The construction itself generates around 20,000 jobs. And then you have maintenance jobs, you have all kinds of jobs linked to the hydropower generation. Some of them are very high quality jobs that demand high skilled workers, which is good from a trade union point of view. So Brazil, the large hydropower generation in Brazil corresponds nowadays to 12% of the world's hydropower employment-related numbers. So 12% of the world hydropower employment in 2017 was generated in Brazil. And if you take a look, most of the employment generated in hydropower plants is in southern countries, right? So of course there are a lot of contradictions when we talk about hydropower generation. And in the case of Brazil, one of those contradictions is that the potential for new hydropower generation is located in the Amazon region, right? And that overlaps with the green areas that you can see, which are indigenous peoples' territories. So there is a direct impact on indigenous peoples and also non-indigenous peoples that live on those areas, right? That should be taken into account by the labor movement as well. So what kind of just transition for those communities if hydropower is the choice, right? And how the labor movement relates to those communities. And of course they have been struggling against not only Belo Monte, but the many different dams that are being built in the Amazon region. Okay, so we have seen that oil in Latin America also plays an important role in energy consumption and generation, especially concerning transportation, right? And in the case of Brazil, it's even worse because we do not have a railroad system that is significant. So most of the transportation, cargo, passengers is done by road transportation using diesel, using gasoline, as you know. So the oil sector in Brazil has a very long history of being seen as a strategic sector that must be public and nationalized. And that comes back to 1955. This is an old picture from a campaign with the very famous slogan in Brazil, "The oil must be ours," right? So this is referring to onshore oil that was being exploited back in the 50s. But in 2006, we can see President Lula mobilizing the oil capacity of the Brazilian state in the same ways as President Vargas did in the 50s. But Lula was now referring to the offshore oil discoveries that Brazil had made. But as you can see, oil is presented and seen by the Brazilian society as a very positive thing and as a strategic asset that must be in public hands. Okay, so although it's in public hands, right, Brazil has its oil company Petrobras, which is, dominates almost 100% of the oil sector. That does not mean that we'll have a democratic control over the company, although it's public, right? So as you know, in 2016, we had a coup in Brazil, and the government that came after that is a very neoliberal, pro-market government. And the new president of Petrobras in July 2017, last year, changed the prices policies for oil and gasoline and diesel, letting the market fluctuate prices on a daily basis. So in a few months, we had some of a 55–56% increase in the oil and gasoline prices in Brazil, driven by the market, right? Although Petrobras is a state company. That has led, and I'm talking about things that are happening right now in Brazil, this past week. This picture is like 4 days ago. This has led to a lockout by the truck transportators employers on the first place. That's why I call it a lockout, which was followed by a strike by workers as well, and has gained the support of civil society in general in Brazil, because oil prices have risen a lot in a very short period of time, in a moment in which the national economy is in recession. So the employers went on strike, saying that their profits were not being enough to compensate the prices of the freight and so on. So this has led to panic, because if you don't have transportation, the oil doesn't get to the gas station, right? So people have run out of oil in Brazil right now, today, as this strike continues. This has been our little oil shock, although there is no shortage of oil. It's just a problem of, transportation prices, a political bargain, But it shows how energy is vital to people, and very quickly it can generate chaos if there is a structural problem in energy generation, right? So, on the other hand, talking about oil with Brazilian workers is very hard, because of all this tradition of having a good perspective on oil, understanding oil as a matter of national sovereignty. And nowadays, as the privatization attempts towards Petrobras increase, so does the workers' resistance to privatization. So these are recent demonstrations carried out by the Oil Workers Federation against the privatization of Petrobras, right? And although this guy in the photo upwards is the president of the Oil Workers Federation, he was the one that agreed to signing the moratorium on fracking. It was in 2014, I guess, right? But they wouldn't sign a moratorium on deep sea oil drilling, right? So, but they did sign that for fracking. So, another question for us just to conclude. We have been talking about just transition of the workforce, as Sean told us, as the Paris Agreement mentions it, and as the ITUC Just Transition Center and others have been working on it. What about a just transition for unions? And I ask that because many of our most powerful unions are in dirty industries, right? And that's, of course, is not the workers' fault, but it's just the way things are. So what are we doing when we promote a just transition discourse? Are we just eroding our union base and weakening our stronger unions? Or do we need to start talking about a transition for unions, right? In Latin America, we have an expression which is trade union self-reform, which has to do with the transformations of trade unions for the future, right? So I don't have the answer, but would it be reasonable to start thinking about a oil and wind union or a oil and solar union? I don't know. Because otherwise our strong oil workers union will disappear and we will have nothing in place, right? That's the question. So I'll go over these employment figures because I have run out of time just to get to the end of my presentation. That has to do with the role of the state and public policy, right? Because the mainstream just transition discourse basically asks for the state for public policies for just transition. And at the same time, it asks for companies to embrace just transition and be kind to workers. But how can we achieve that just transition? And we can see it's very much needed. There's no transition happening right now, right? So how can we achieve this just transition without huge investments from the state and without a whole bunch of public policies that will have to be put in place? And why do I ask that? Because we have been seeing a very strong attack from corporations over states in the form of changes in international law that are promoted through trade agreements, other agreements, which basically allow corporations to sue states in private courts for public policies that may harm their profits or their expected profits. So how can states be able to promote just transition policies if sometimes those policies will be against the profit of certain corporations? We will be sued by those corporations because of our just transition policies. That's a very tough question to answer. And I guess we should ask corporations that, basically. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Diego, and thanks to everybody for sharing your examples from your regions. We are a little bit over time, which is totally not our fault, so I would still like to do a brief round of questions and comments, followed by final remarks by our panelists. Daniel, you were very quick.
Yeah, I wanted to thank, I'm Daniel Chávez from the Transnational Institute in Amsterdam. I wanted to thank Angel and Judy for the presentation. I think for many of us here, it's quite difficult to imagine what is going on in Puerto Rico. So I would recommend everybody to download an article that was published today in the New England Journal for Medicine that shows, it was published today, that shows that the official figure of death, which is about 64, is 70 times higher. So we are talking about 4,600 people dead after Hurricane Maria. And this is not the only indicator. I'm sure you can provide many more. My question to Angel is, how far is the privatization of PREPA advanced? Is it a done deal, or is it still room to continue the struggle to revert the decision to privatize?
I thank you very much for the excellent presentations again. I found the example of Angel of Puerto Rico absolutely striking, similar to what South African government did, and in relation to the strive now to privatize or to introduce private partnerships into the provision of the energy in the country, which I spoke about quite earlier. And I think it's a striking similarity in that there is an agenda, firstly, to discredit the role of the state by running down existing public utilities and render them unaffordable and render them insolence, and before rescuing them through privatization. And so that in the minds of ordinary people, the issue of public ownership gets so discredited. The issue of the role of the state in the provision of the basic services gets so discredited. And in the process, the private ownership and the private sector, and therefore the market-based economy, is basically seen as the savior of humankind. And exactly the same way in South Africa, they started to refuse to invest in the energy utility until there was a crisis of rolling blackouts. And thereafter they increased the tariffs so much that people started to revolt against the energy utility, and now they are introducing the IPPs and as a savior of this utility. Same thing as you are describing in terms of what is happening in Puerto Rico.
Yeah, again, concerning Puerto Rico, one of the things we notice increasingly, especially in utilities, but throughout public services, is the role of the financiers, is the role of banking. And especially as concerns Puerto Rico, the financial engineering that was done to completely enslave the colony by form of vulture capitalism is mind-blowing. It's a story that needs to be, as it were, on top, equal to the amount of deaths caused by Maria, is the amount of deaths caused by this financial engineering known as the capital appreciation bonds. And it's something that it's coming to your country in another form, because finance is taking over absolutely everything. And their next big target, which is part of the next panel, is public services.
So I have three very brief, here, and here. And then we give the panelists the chance to briefly respond.
Nancy Romer from Professional Staff Congress of CUNY and AFT Local, representing CUNY faculty and staff, City University. specifically around Puerto Rico and in Brazil, but this is a question really for everyone. How do the unions intersect, or not intersect, work with, collaboratively with community groups? In Brazil, you talked about work that indigenous people had led the struggle to defend, of course, the Amazon. And earlier, one of the Brazil comrades talked about working with La Via Campesina, the food sovereignty organizers. What does that look like on the ground? Sharing power, sharing perspective with community groups, indigenous groups on the ground. Because that's something that I think we're all trying to grapple with. As Ananda said earlier, what does that look like in terms of taking leadership from people from the community, sharing solutions with people from the community? Thank you.
Yeah, this question is from my friend from Vietnam. We've heard a lot about countries that come from capitalist countries, and what are the differences that you may have compared to the other comments from other countries? I'd like to hear about that. Thank you.
My name is Rosa. I'm coming from the National Union of Metal Workers of South Africa. My question is directed to Digo from Brazil. You know, the challenges that are currently confronting Brazil, it's a clear sign that the left is fragmented. So my question is the increase of the oil be seen, or it can yield to an opportunity of uniting the forces in Brazil? Because of, as far as we are concerned, the left has totally surrendered to the capitalist. I thank you.
Contestar todas las preguntas detalladamente tendríamos que tener un día y voy a tratar de resumir en 2 minutos.
Answer all these detailed questions, we're going to take a day, so I'm going to try to summarize this in a couple of minutes.
El proceso o la propuesta de privatización de energía en Puerto Rico es la más confusa, más compleja y que nadie entiende.
The process of privatization proposal in Puerto Rico is one of the most complex and confusing proposals there is, and no one understands it.
La APA, la American Public Association, dice que en los últimos 10 años la única privatización surgida en Estados Unidos, la compañía ha tenido máximo 10,000 abonados y nosotros tenemos 1.5 millones de abonados.
According to a statistic of APA, American Public Association, is that in the last 10 years, whenever they had the only private sector company they had was of 10,000 workers, but we...
No, abonados, clientes.
10,000 clients, but we have 1.5 million.
1.5 millones de abonados.
1.5 million of clients.
Por lo tanto, lo que quiere decir es que nadie sale de un negocio así.
That means that no one can exit a business like that.
Hay muchos intereses desde el Congreso, desde intereses económicos en los Estados Unidos y pequeños intereses económicos en Puerto Rico.
There are many economical interests found in the Congress, and small economic interests in the United States, and small economic interests in Puerto Rico.
Precisamente, ustedes me han notado un poco distraído de que están en este momento en Puerto Rico discutiendo la aprobación en el Senado del proyecto sobre la privatización.
Precisely, you probably have noticed that I've been a bit distracted, but they're precisely discussing the model of the project for privatization in the legislature in Puerto Rico.
La estrategia nuestra va a ser distinta. Lo que van a aprobar ahora es un marco legal para poder hacer los activos, vender los activos. Ahora es que nosotros, y dije nosotros, todos podemos hacer para desalentar a la privatización en Puerto Rico y a sus compradores.
And their strategy is using a legal framework to sell the assets of the company. But the question is, what can we all do to discourage the privatization of the business in Puerto Rico?
Nosotros obviamente tenemos alternativas y una de ellas es comenzar propuestas de desarrollo de energías renovables comunitarias. Así, los que quieran comprar el negocio no van a tener negocio.
Obviously, we distinguish ourselves by submitting proposals of communitary initiatives, so those who are going to buy the business won't have a business at all.
Pero hace falta una expresión clara y contundente de todos nosotros sobre este proceso de privatización.
But a clear and tangible decision is necessary for us, and it's very important for us to take a decision at this point and bias of privatization.
Precisamente la estrategia que hicieron en África fue la misma que hicieron en Puerto Rico. No cambiaron ni un punto ni una letra de esa estrategia.
Precisely the same story that happened in Africa happened in Puerto Rico. They have not changed a letter or a point of what happened.
El pueblo nos quería antes de María, después hablaban mal durante María, y ahora que toda la ayuda se fue, nos quieren otra vez en Puerto Rico, los trabajadores de energía eléctrica.
The people wanted us before Maria. During Maria, they didn't like us, but after the service is gone, then they wanted the workers back from the trade union of Puerto Rico.
Por lo tanto, no podemos perder la esperanza. El camino es difícil, no tenemos soluciones mágicas, pero no hacer nada no es opción.
That is why we cannot lose hope. The path is difficult. There is no magic solutions, but we should continue to move forward.
Just to respond to the issue of unions and communities working together in Puerto Rico, it's a little bit more difficult with the electrical workers union and communities because that relationship is more complicated than, for example, the relationship between service workers, whether it's hospital workers or teachers and communities. There's been an incredible movement built by the Federation of Teachers in Puerto Rico, which I must emphasize for those many people in this country are not aware. Because of the laws in Puerto Rico and the ability of bona fides to represent teachers, there was a deliberate attempt by the government of Puerto Rico to destroy that union. It was an independent union, not affiliated with any union, used to be in the AFT, left the AFT, very militant, had a strike in 2008, stopped charter schools completely, no charter schools in the country, was decertified by the state, a company union, a business union of principals, called the Asociación, was later given a health plan so that they could get members. There was an election 2 years ago. The FMPR was excluded from the election, so the only people that they could vote for exclusive representation was the business union, the company union, which was then absorbed by the AFT. I think it's very important for people to understand that. So the AFT's affiliation is with the business union in Puerto Rico. It's doing nothing to fight privatization, charter schools, and organize the community. The small federation of teachers, because it has a structure called a bona fide where they can get members who voluntarily join, has been leading the struggle, having parents taking over schools, sitting in on schools, rebuilding schools. We helped to participate in repairing schools, but Kelleher, who's like the Betsy DeVos of Puerto Rico, has tried to close hundreds of schools and did not succeed because parents took over. They're still taking over. So when it comes to the schools and the teachers, that particular teachers union and the communities, they are in motion right now. It's an uphill battle, but as people start returning to the island, it's hopefully that will build. And so that's definitely one of the struggles that's going on right now, and it's every day people taking over schools, sitting in, because there was purposeful, just like it was purposeful destruction of the electrical system, they purposely did not open schools when schools were really capable of being open. Teachers were there, students were there, and they were shuttered. So they opened the doors and took over the schools, and that's going on every day, just as one example.
Thank you for the question related to Vietnam. Just to add a couple of points, the energy price in Vietnam is probably the lowest by international standard. And also in terms of access to electricity, it's quite high, about 98% access. And the most important point to mention here is that up to now, the energy in Vietnam is owned and managed by public sector or public sector agency, EVN, Electricity Vietnam. Vietnam owns it. So probably because of that, they are able to deliver, access, good access, but at the same time lower price. And also in terms of prices, there is a progressive pricing system. If you use more, you pay more. So the companies who use more, they have to pay more. That's the system so far. But with this foreign direct investment, as I mentioned earlier, it is also Vietnam's challenge that it's about 1.4 million workers join labor force every year. So they have to create 1 million workforce through foreign direct investment. Often they are low, like a low skill work. About 2 million, 0.2 million migrate, and about 0.2 million, do other jobs. So foreign direct investment, therefore, is a reality for Vietnam's point of view for job creation. And what that means is they have to listen to different agreements and surrender some of the policies. And what will be interesting to see is how much they could resist in terms of public ownership of the electricity, coming days. In their policy paper, they say by 2024 they will privatize. So as being a communist country, to fit into the democratic world, they have to be a little more adjusting and do even more than others have to fit in this system. But internally, what we see within the party is that I'm not sure they will privatize or go so aggressively privatization, because when they joined WTO in 2006, there were 6 items in as essential services, and electricity, water were 2 of the items. They were seen as essential service. Government will continue to provide and control. So we will see how that develops. And this is where probably trade unions and workers' organizations and others, how they will support and use this as an organizing tool to rally behind good policy. And this is what is yet to be seen in coming days. Thank you.
Do you want to say something? A final word?
Diego.
Okay, thanks for the tough questions. Well, I think you have 2 different situations when you are in government and when you are outside of government, right? Meaning when the left is in power or when the left is not in power.
You didn't know that.
You will. Because when you are in government, you're obliged to make some tough choices, right? And I mean, every energy choice will have a social impact, a different one, right? So you have to choose either to build huge dams in the Amazon region or to support fracking, for instance. Those are tough choices, right? And you have to choose one of them. So when you're in government, it's much harder to dialogue with other social actors and communities, right? So I think that even though it's very unfortunate that the Workers' Party government ended the way it did, but it certainly has relieved some of the pressure and has opened the room for a more honest dialogue between unions and social movements or communities. And I think that the first step for the trade union movement is to be open to participate in some different spaces which are not traditionally trade union spaces, right? And to be open to hear others' opinions on the labor movement, on the development model, on jobs in general. But also to be able to point out some of the trade union perspectives that often environmental movements do not take into account. So for instance, earlier this morning when Daniel from TUCA was talking about their alliance with the Friends of the Earth Network, it's possible because the Friends of the Earth Network has also changed their approach to climate change and to the environment question, bringing into their own discussion some aspects related to labor. So it's a two-way process, right? It's not only the union's fault or the environmentalists' fault, it's a mutual learning process, which does not mean that there will be consensus, right? We have also to be clear on that. But just to mention you a couple of things that are happening in Brazil. One very recent and innovative political space that was opened, or built if you will, is the Labor and Peasant Energy Platform, which is basically a space like TUED for debating the energy-related problems and future perspectives, possibilities of common action, and so on. The other thing is that the trade union movement, especially CUT, has been recently this year very active in the alternative forum, the World Alternative Forum on Water, which is supposedly a very faraway issue for the trade union movement, but I think that demonstrates the willingness of CUT to broaden its perspective. And also the participation in the Carta de Belém group, which is a network that was created in 2009, dealing especially with the financial aspects of climate change. So that shows how, you know, open the trade union movement must be to receive these other different perspectives. On the second question, very quickly, I don't think the Brazilian left is split, and I don't think it has surrendered to capital. Actually, it can mean different things to surrender to capital. We would have to discuss it. But what we see now in Brazil is the opposite. I mean, the left has split during the Workers' Party government. But now that everybody is in the opposition and actually being chased by right-wing politics and by even the justice system itself, the left is very much united. And there are different left fronts. Actually, there are two major left fronts in which social movements and political parties and trade unions that would not be able to sit at the same table during the Workers' Party governments now are trying to resist together.
Okay, so I just wanted to thank everybody on the panel and also to our translator here. Give them all a hand.